Hi, folks. Thank you for gathering together today. I'm Jennifer Schlueter, Dean of Graduate Studies here at the Columbus College of Art and Design, a nonprofit art and design college that has been a creative force within Central Ohio for over 140 years. I want to welcome you all to today's event, which is part of CCAD's Visiting Artists and Scholars series. We are thrilled to be speaking with and learning from writer and activist Adrian Maree Brown. And while we're sad that we can't gather together on campus here in downtown Columbus as we typically would, it is a beautiful day out there. We are really happy that we and you can take this time to be together online midday. We also welcome folks joining us from outside Columbus, which I think really is the lone advantage of this kind of virtual format. And before we jump into today's event and I introduce our visiting artist and another special guest, I want to share a few housekeeping notes. We are recording today so that we can share this event on our website for those who weren't able to join us. And the event is, as you've already noticed, in a webinar format, so all lines are muted and videos are off other than for the speakers. But we will hold time and space to answer questions from you at the end. So please feel free to use the Q&A function throughout the discussion to submit them as you think of them. And you are also welcome and encouraged to use the chat function throughout to share any reactions or comments. I want to make sure we recognize some very special organizations. CCAD's Visiting Artists and Scholars series is made possible thanks to support from the Greater Columbus Arts Council, the Ohio Arts Council, and the Skestos Endowment Fund for Visiting Artists and Lectures. Now, I want to introduce to you our graphic recorder, Tiaré Lani Jung. Tiaré was born on Kwale territory and raised with Hawaiian values. They are a Mahu, two-spirit person, and moved to Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish territories to study illustration and stayed for the love of queer community and the land. They center Black, Indigenous, trans, and disability liberation, and they draw to make visible collective wisdom and futures of belonging. Uplifting community voices with an intersectional approach brings them joy. And while Adrian is speaking, Tiaré will be doing a live, we will call it emergent graphic recording to visually capture and respond to what Adrian is discussing. Tiaré, would you like to say a few words about your process?
Yeah, just through diaspora and internet searches, I'm learning constantly about my responsibilities as a two-spirit person, or Mahu in Hawaiian, which is to bring balance. And so when I witness and reflect in drawings, I'm also always asking myself whose voice or leadership is needed to be uplifted here, and where's the most care needed. And for me, graphic recording is really a lateral liberation tool for us to see ways of changing together. And so I'm a deep Octavia Butler nerd. I'm so thrilled to be in visual conversation with you, Adrian Maree Brown, and with the community that's come together here. So thank you, Jennifer, and thank you everyone for having me.
That's wonderful. We're really delighted that you could be with us. Tiaré's work will be visible as it emerges on a split screen with Adrian as she speaks. So as screen sharing has begun, you can use the view control at the top right of your screen to change your view to side-by-side :speaker. And then you will notice a divider line between the image that Tiaré is creating and the speaker. So if you choose to, you can click and drag that bar manually to the middle of your screen so that you can equalize visual space between Adrian and Tiaré's work. And we'll remind you about those tools in the chat as we go. Now, I'm excited to introduce today's speaker. Adrian Maree Brown is the writer in residence at the Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute and author of We Will Not Cancel Us and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice, Pleasure Activism, The Politics of Feeling Good, Emergent Strategy, Shaping Change, Changing Worlds, and the co-editor of Octavia's Brood, Science Fiction from Social Justice Movements, and How to Get Stupid White Men Out of Office. She is the co-host of the How to Survive the End of the World, Octavia's Parables, and Emergent Strategy podcasts. Adrian is rooted in Detroit. Welcome, welcome, Adrian Maree Brown.
All right, let's see if this is working. Am I here? Am I on?
Yes.
All right, beautiful. So my name is Adrian, and I'm really excited to be here with you all. I consider myself a scholar of belonging. And the questions that I have shaped my life around, the questions that I've been asking are really, how do we change together? How do we honor the potential for change in each other? How do we shake off the systems that harm us, even when they are within? And how do we hold each other through processes of collective change? And I'm going to speak to you today for maybe 30, 40 minutes, and then I want to engage in Q&A and like be in discussion with you. I'm really grateful that you invited me to have this discussion, to be alive in all of these questions. And I always like to name that I don't start alone. I think we're in a beautiful practice right now of naming what is the indigenous territory that we are on. So I live in Detroit on Anishinaabe territory, but I think that a lot of times we don't do the work of also naming what is the lineage we're in. And it's also a part of indigenous practice that has happened every time I've been in indigenous-led space. And for me, as a person who's displaced from a lot of my lineage, there's a lot of chosen lineage that I've engaged in, a lot of people that I have claimed as ideological lineage, as partners for the questions and the thinking that I've been in over the years. So one of my main thought partners, who is now ancestral, 15 years ancestral, is Octavia Butler. I was very excited to hear Tiaré is an Octavia lover, because I'm like, there's so many of us that are recognizing the gifts that Octavia offered to us. She was a Black science fiction writer. She gifted us 12 novels and a collection of short stories that were published during her lifetime. And then there's this place called the Huntington Library, where there's untold riches of more and more and more stories and writing and journals and memories. I keep pointing people to this new book that Linnell George put out, that's A Handful of Earth, A Handful of Stars, that's all about Octavia Butler's writing processes. And I think it's really useful. But along the way of that writing, she won every major award in science fiction, and she won the MacArthur Genius Award. And she was the first science fiction writer to do that. And she helped me understand that if I wanted to see Black people in the future, and specifically if I want to see Black liberation in the future, then I had to shape the future. And my imagination was the central tool for that shaping. Dreaming, sharing my dreams, and dreaming with others. And I learned the terms later of Afrofuturism, Black speculative fiction, African futurism, Black futurism. And I got so excited by all the range of options. And then I came across another writer, a poet named Walida E. Marisha, and she had termed a phrase visionary fiction. And she did an issue of this magazine called Left Roots Magazine, which is an amazing bit of archival material if you can ever get your hands on the Left Roots Visionary Fiction edition. But, her work and my work were like kind of crawling towards each other. Like, is anyone out there like loving Octavia and wondering about how we do this stuff? And what she meant by visionary fiction was fiction that articulates futures that are actually an embodiment of our radical politic, and not just we've gone off to another space and time, but Captain Kirk is still the only one we're focused on. And, he's just taking all the women of every planet and so on and so forth. And I say that as a hardcore Trekkie, like I love everything about Star Trek. And I recognize that there are still ways in which just by who they focused on as central characters, they upheld the paradigms that we're trying to pull apart. So what does it look like to actually center those who are marginalized in both most fiction and in most reality? What does it look like to uplift the way change actually happens from the bottom up? What does it look like to create futures that are neither utopian nor dystopian, but reality-based and hopeful, right? Something that I think Octavia did brilliantly was she put us in worlds that were like, oh, I'm terrified. I don't know that I want to be here. But then she gave us something in it that felt compelling enough. That's like, I can partner with this and I can practice inside of this. I could become something new. And there's an amazing thinker and writer named Terry Marshall, who's part of Intelligent Mischief, along with Aisha Shillingford. And Terry calls this the imagination battle, that we are in an imagination battle between those who imagine the world as it is now, with all of these constructs of gender and race and class and all these constructs of divisiveness and superiority and inferiority, and then told us this is the world, and that we are actually in a battle to reclaim our whole humanity. And I love that concept of my imagination is the front line. Our collective imagination is the front line of what we need to do. So Octavia says in her work that change is the most constant force in the universe, and that we do not have to be victims of change, that we can partner with it. So I love those ideas. I have her tattooed all along my arm saying, all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. And in that, it's not a denial of God. It's not a denial of any ways that other people understand God, but it is really, whether you personify it or not, that force that is constantly creating and changing all of the world is a sacred force, and it works at the smallest scale and the largest scale, but that change is constant. And if we recognize that, and if we humble ourselves to that, we can partner with that and we can shape change. I like that idea. So Emergent Strategy is a book that I published in 2017 that feels like my best offer on how we partner with change. How do we get in right relationship with change? And Gracie Boggs was a Chinese American activist who lived in Detroit, moved to Detroit on purpose, which I did years later. And she was part of the Black Power movement. She threw herself in with the Black Power movement. She was just like, what y'all are up to, I'm up to. It is aligned. Your freedom is deeply tied to my capacity to ever be free. And one of the things she taught, there's so many things. And one of the things she taught was that we must transform ourselves to transform the world. And that to me felt like one of the fundamental keys, right? It's like if you're like, oh, change is constant, I have to partner with change. Transforming myself is how I can transform the world. It was like a moment. That's one of the ways you get in right relationship with change. And Emergent Strategy says we transform ourselves, we transform the world, we partner with change, and we learn from the natural world, because we are nature, in spite of all the messaging that's like there's us and nature, man versus nature. It's like, no, we are nature. We are circadian beings. We have cycles. We mate, we love, we have wired bodies for pleasure, for finding each other. We are fighting to survive. We come from all of the same elements that everything else that is alive comes from, and we go back to those same elements. So it's not being whimsical to say we are made of stardust. It's just like, that's science. We are made of stardust. And we have ancestors that come from all aspects of nature that inform who we are and how we function. And I just posted, I'm like, let me see if I can find this, and maybe it'll work to hold it up to you. I always feel like trying to show things on the phone is like, it's like trying to take a picture of the moon, right? It never quite works. But I posted a fracture of existence, and we see the concept, human size as it is in the world. Our fingerprints look like the inside of tree stumps. The placenta that gives us life is the same shape as the tree of life. Lungs look like tree branches. Leaf veins and human veins and river networks all look the same. And nature teaches us small as small, right? There are fractals at every system, a way that we can understand scale, that there's patterns and they exist at the smallest scale, large, which can even see origin. And to me, it is the most humbling and powerful truth to recognize that everything big in our universe is made up of small parts, particles, cells, atoms, things that are smaller than we can see or even comprehend. It means that when we want to change the world, we cannot ignore that we are a part of that world. We are the part that we can most consistently practice changing. We can practice through ourselves, with ourselves, in ourselves, between ourselves. But this is the place where we actually decide to opt into practicing something different or not. And I can tell you all day, stop being racist, stop being patriarchal, stop being a capitalist, stop participating in any of these systems of harm. But I can only know the rigor of my own practice. I can only actually take responsibility for what I am up to internally. And one thing I want to say about that is most of us don't consciously, intentionally choose our practices, not for the first part of our lives, at least, right? That's what we talk about. There being an awakening, a moment where we're like, I am actually responsible for what I do and the impact that comes from it. So for most of us, we are socialized into a set of practices, and we might be told it's religion. We might be told this is our education. We might be told this is just how our family is. We're given all these ways of understanding the world, but we are socialized into these practices. They become our norm, and then we participate in them until something else comes along and we recognize every single small decision I make is moving me into complicity with existing systems of harm that I may not want to be aligned with, or is moving me towards liberation from those systems and towards thinking for myself and towards figuring out other ways of being in the world. So this month, April, is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And I wanted to lift this up because the Me Too movement is talking about how rape culture persists in a million small and socialized decisions, normalizing the domination of women, trans people, children. As much as we want to declare that only bad people perpetrate rape, only bad people cross boundaries, only bad people move without consent, it's actually all kinds of practices. We're all taught to participate in some way. We're taught to swallow our nose. We're taught to diminish the hurt that happens to us. We're taught to encourage violence and make a joke out of it when it happens. We're taught to accept offensive jokes. We're taught to accept uncomfortable proximity. So this gets shaped. And for some of us, we're given to it as this is the culture we live in. This is what it means to be of our culture. For others, it's just like, this is the water we're swimming in. We wouldn't even pull it out as a distinct thing we would recognize as a practice. And now we're in what Joanna Macy calls the Great Turning. And I think that we're turning away from things like rape culture, but it's also tied into this much larger turning away from practices of extraction, exploitation, greed, turning away from competition, turning away from warring, turning away from profits over people. Literally everything, every part of how our society has been structured must change. And it's up to us to reimagine the world as one in which, this works for all the people that are here, all the creatures that are here, all the life that is here. And I always think about this, like, it makes sense to me architecturally, right? If you have a bunch of architects sitting around a table designing a building, and none of them have disabilities, and none of them are in touch with people with disabilities, they might design the most beautiful building, and it might be green and sustainable, and it might be, groundbreaking and all those things, but it likely won't be accessible, right? Because there's no one who's sitting at the table that's just like, oh, this is what it needs to take care of, all the different kinds of bodies that'll come through it. And that's how we end up with a billion gorgeous skyscraping buildings that don't have wheelchair ramps or don't have accessible bathrooms or don't have sound options for people who can't hear. And it takes fights, it takes battles to be adding those things in afterwards, right? But that same thing that happens at the architectural level with our buildings happens in all of our systems with all kinds of people and all kinds of needs. And we're in a very painful phase of that turning right now, where it still feels much more comfortable to punish other people for how they're participating in some system of harm, rather than commit to taking collective responsibility for ending all these kind of harms. In the US, we have transitioned from a slavery system, a history of enslavement based on race, that where people who were enslaved were expected to provide free labor to the nation to make it function. And we're basically being punished for being born Black and seen as inhuman because how we were born, right? So we transitioned from that system to an industrial complex of prisons and punishment and policing that depend upon a false but shared imagination that some people are bad and some are good. And it's no surprise that Black people who were initially in that enslaved people are often overlapping in that imagination, which did not necessarily change with the majority of people that are in these prison systems. But it's also, what we think of as, poor people. We think of people with disabilities, with mental health struggles, right? That these are bad people. The truth is that every single human being has the full capacity to feel and to cause harm and to have a need and to have a horrible day and to move into violence at times. And the truth is that some of our systems actually require harm towards each other. Capitalism requires us to dehumanize some people so that we can perpetually gain, and take from a world that actually has just enough for all of us if we share it. The truth is that some behaviors perpetuate harm and some traumas shape us to repeat harm, patterns of harm, so that they become justified and normalized. And I've been in this really painful reflection of how the system of shooting people in the street without impunity is a pattern of harm, and it's almost normalized now. And so we're watching this trial happen for George Floyd, and it's for him to have justice, right? And it's a complex situation because we know that Derek Chauvin going to prison will not necessarily bring justice for George Floyd. And we know that in the process of this conversation, we're watching people put George Floyd on trial as if there's something that he could have done as a human being in his own survival process that would mean it was okay for him to be killed in the street, that someone could sit on his neck, right? Because these things get justified and normalized, we're like, I don't even have hope. I don't even have hope that this will be justice, right? Then we have to start to get like, well, how do we do that? How does that happen as a society? And then within movement spaces, right, we have to turn inward and be like, well, are we doing that? Are we perpetuating those same norms of punishment? And I would say within both movement and cultural spaces, the arts, our punishment behaviors take on other shapes. So we take on the shapes of public shame. We take on the shape of humiliation. I think our call outs and our cancel culture, the banishment, the design that we can dispose of some people because they're bad and we don't think that they can change, or we don't think they can change in time, which I get because I've definitely dealt with people where I was like, I don't know when you're going to change, but it's not going to be on my timeline. And I can't dedicate more of my life to suffering at your hands, right? And when we began doing the strategies of call out and cancellation, I think that we're often an expression of how vast the space was, how vast the power dynamic was between us and those who were causing us harm. This is Black and brown people who were like, we are going to call this out. This was Indigenous people calling out massive environmental companies. This is folks who are like, we don't have resources, but we have each other, and we're going to use the people, the numbers to call this behavior into the light. It's a brilliant strategy. And sometimes the efforts to do that actually stopped immediate harm, actually changed the trajectory. They can be very effective strategies when they're used with discernment, when they're used across those power dynamics. And sometimes it stops an abuser from being able to perpetuate harm in our communities. Like this is a strategy that can work. And so then it's like, well, how do we use it? How do we use it well? And does it actually stop the harm long-term, right? Stopping the surface level behavior is one thing, but are we transforming that impetus, that root system of harm? Or are we delaying it? Are we displacing it to another location, to another community, which I've seen happen, right? People are like, oh, I can't create the harm in this movement sector anymore. I'll go move over here, but stay the same person. And so what I have seen happen is that with the age of social media, we have gotten very comfortable with calling out and canceling people that we don't know, that might be horizontal to us in the power structure or relatively horizontal, people we have no relationship with to, at any level, to be able to say like, oh, there's a relationship we're trying to restore in this dynamic. These are people with whom we may or may not have tried other strategies, and that we're also calling out for different reasons. Like the reason becomes multitudinous, and it can include existing within a certain identity. It includes saying the wrong thing. It includes making a mistake, being in a conflict and not having mediation or accountability processes or any of the steps we would want to take to see if we can get this right. So I wrote this booklet. I wrote an essay first that became a booklet last summer. It's called We Will Not Cancel Us. And it's my effort to shape the future of this conversation by naming what is happening and asking us for both discernment and asking us to get curious about who benefits from us tearing each other apart publicly, and asking us to learn from nature, right? To learn from the mushrooms, that what does it actually take to detoxify systems from harmful behaviors rather than plucking off individuals. If you pluck one mushroom out of a whole huge system of mycelium, you've done nothing to that system of mycelium. It will continue to function, usually continue to function quite well. And one of the things I want to speak about is the process of writing that. In order for me to write it, I had to step into discomfort. I had to make mistakes. I had to learn from those mistakes. And then I had to invite people to join me in acknowledging that we actually don't know how to do all of this yet. So what we're currently doing shrinks and divides our movements when we most need to grow and collaborate and find out how we belong to each other. And, writing the initial essay, I had stepped away. I'd been on sabbatical. When I came back, it was so glaringly obvious, like we're not holding on to each other. We want to belong, but we're trying to forge our belonging out of pushing other people out of belonging. We want to heal, but we're not creating a space in which healing can happen for ourselves or for other people. We want to stop harm from happening, but we're perpetuating more harm in order to stop that harm from happening. And there was a hopelessness inside of all of it. I was just like, I don't know, when we're doing these moves of calling each other out, I don't know if we actually really deeply believe in people's capacity to change. And I don't know what happens if we don't believe we can change, right? I think we can get stuck in cycles of good, bad, binary systems, right? This is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. And Octavia Butler, always our teacher, taught us that one of the core flaws that humans have is this, that we combine our intelligence with hierarchy, that we use our capacity to reason, but we use it often to create these systems where one is better and one is worse. And so I see us doing that inside of movement spaces where this is not to say egregious harm is not happening in movement or in the arts or in other sectors. What happened initially was when I wrote the first essay was called Unthinkable Thoughts. And when I wrote that first essay, I heard from people from so many different walks of life who were like, this is happening to me, or this is happening in my world, or this is happening in my organization. And what I felt and heard from people was a lot of terror. And people were like, there's no room to make mistakes. There's no place for people to come out and honestly say what kind of harm they've actually caused. There's not space for people to take a risk of not knowing publicly. And if there's no room for us to even be in the practices of like, oh, this is this is a mess and we're in it. If we can't show that, if we're trying to just correct the surface level of the behavior without actually transforming our understanding, without actually going down into the root system and healing, I think that we end up in a very precarious and fragile movement space that cannot actually handle the pressure that is coming at us. I also have to name that we are in the wake of COINTELPRO. We are in the wake and still in the world in which there are people who understand the power of movements, that understand what it looks like when solidarity actually takes root, that understand that we could change everything. It is possible, but not if we're tearing each other apart, right? We will not be able to do it if we are, if we can't see each other as an us. If the moment someone makes a mistake, we try to toss them over into the realm of a them that is not coming to the future with us. So we're in a complex place with it because, even in the process of writing the essay, I was like, oh, how do I understand and speak to the distinction between how people who cause harm need to be held and those who are surviving it, when it's not actually like these two highly distinct bodies, but actually mostly overlapping bodies, because a lot of the people who cause harm are also survivors. How do I speak about that? How do I speak about creating communities that are wealthy when it comes to mediation skills, wealthy when it comes to community accountability skills, which we are not right now, right? Right now we are, the metaphor I often think of is like when you watch a little baby trying to learn how to walk and they pull themselves up and then they plop back down. And sometimes they plop back down and it hurts or they're embarrassed and they cry. I think we do some of that. We're like, this doesn't even work and I hate this and it's uncomfortable and I hate it. And sometimes they fall back down and they're like, oh, okay, let me keep trying. And I'm going to get back up. And I think that's where we need to pivot to, is that we're like, we are just getting started at this. That means we're going to do a lot of these processes and a lot of them are not going to work. And we're going to have a lot to learn. And we are doing this not just for ourselves. In the same way, Harriet Tubman wasn't, on the Underground Railroad just for herself. She was like, I got here, I've got to go back and get more people and bring them with me, and go back and get more people and bring them with me. And each time she made the journey, she was learning more and more about how to make the journey and how to survive the journey. We are the same way. It's like we have to go and be like, oh, this one didn't quite work the way we wanted to, but what did we learn inside of that? The way I originally wrote the essay wasn't exactly how I wanted to express it. People were able to misunderstand things and think that I wanted to protect people who are causing harm. No, I didn't. What I do want to say is they are also humans. They are also learning. We have to hold that ground. How do we do that together? We have to keep learning. And I think we have to be able to learn in public if we're going to do this together, right? And I think that we actually have to do this if we hope to belong to each other. And this piece around belonging feels fundamental to me, that in the somatics work that I've done, which is somatics is the study of wholeness, the body in its wholeness. And it talks about that the basic human need for all of us, the basic human needs are dignity, safety, and belonging. That we want to all be in our dignity, be able to stand in who we are without apology, without shame, that we want to feel safe and protected, that we want to feel like our community has us and holds us, and that we want to feel belonging, that we want to feel like as we are, without contortion, without lying, without hiding some aspect of ourselves, as our authentic selves, we get to fully belong. And I think our hearts have been broken by displacement and colonization and genocide. And it's made it really hard to feel for belonging, because originally we all belonged to some place on earth, right? We all belonged to the rhythms of the planting and the tending and the learning how to be. Where was the water? Like, we belonged. And now it's hard. It's hard to find that belonging, but we're wired for it. And I think pleasure, let's bring it to pleasure activism, which is a book that I put out in 2019. We are wired for pleasure. We are wired to feel a yes. We are wired to feel clear boundaries. And all of that helps us understand how to be in community with each other, how to be in spaces that feel good. And that feeling good is an indication that we're on the right path. Not feeling numb, not feeling coping, but actually feeling good, feeling that erotic aliveness. That book is built around the essay of Audre Lorde called The Uses of the Erotic as Power. And she talks about once you have tasted that full erotic aliveness, it becomes impossible to settle for self-negation and despair, depression, those states that are not natural to us. Reading that and looking at how we are right now, what I see so clearly is that oppression, and pain, that's what keeps us in this myth of thinking we don't deserve to feel good, that we only deserve to be in service, that we deserve to struggle with each other, battle with each other, and tear each other apart in these small pockets of scarcity, instead of stepping back and recognizing that there is an abundance to which we can say yes. There's an abundance of belonging out there that we can experience, that we deserve to experience. So I think those are all the things that you all had asked me to speak to. And I think that's just a start. And then let's have some conversation with each other and see what we can learn by moving beyond the one-way talk.
Thank you so much for that, Adrian. What a great place for us to move things over to the folks who are sending some questions in. I'm just going to ask them verbally, and then we'll see where this goes. And Tiaré did a gorgeous job next door on my screen to capturing it all. So
Awesome.
This first question came in, and it's framed like this. Whenever I'm working with people around this way of thinking, that those who harm need to be held in community as well, I always struggle to talk about the both and situation of those who have caused harm, both needing to be accountable and also deserving of care. So how do you respond to that kind of thought process?
I mean, I have good teachers, and I have good teachers. So I really point people towards some of the people who've been teaching me, because I also struggle with this. I'm like, that person caused harm. Like, you need to just call them in, call them out. And Miriam Kaba is a really incredible teacher in this realm. Daniel Sarid is an incredible teacher in this realm. Daniel Sarid taught us that no one experiences violence for the first time when they perpetuate it. That for most people, it's something that has been trained into them, or taught into them, they experienced, and then there's sort of an acting back out. And so something so tender about that to me, that if I can remember that when I see someone causing harm, even showing up in a room causing harm, if I can remember to kind of soften my stance and deepen my stance, and I'm like, who hurt you? That's a very different question than like, what's wrong with you? Why are you so broken? And then Miriam Kaba just put out an incredible book called We Do This Till We Free Us, which I'm like, buy any book that has Miriam Kaba's name on it. But this one in particular is a really beautiful sort of lineage of abolition, talking about abolition, this idea of defunding the police, this idea of doing this, because a lot of times people are like, yeah, that's cool for like some harm, but what about the really bad people? And it's like, even for the really bad people, what we want to figure out is, how do we stop the cycle of harm that they are in, right? Because that would benefit all of us. It would benefit all of us if people who were molesters were able to stop the cycle of harm that caused them to plant that seed in the next generation, right? It would help all of us if there were people who were rapists who were able to recover from whatever was broken in them, harmful in them, early on. Usually this is stuff that happens very early in our lives that sets the pattern for what's going to come later. It would help all of us to get at the root system of what white supremacy is about, right? Be like, you are not supreme, and you are acting out violently from this idea that you are supreme and something's being taken from you. Can we get up under that? Up under that, I notice when I actually engage in that work, because I'm like, oh, you're so terrified of not belonging. And you don't feel that belonging. You've lost touch with all the cultural touch points, the songs and the poems and the spiritual practices that predate colonial worldviews. So there's a lot of pain in there. Now, I think the thing to be cautious about is, I think there can be this collapse where it feels like the survivors are responsible for holding that space for the harm doer. And that's where I think we have to create more space, create more skill. Because to me, in the ideal world, there's room for both of them to get held for the unique processes that both of them need to go through, which are distinct, which are different. But I think that needs to be the goal, even if we can't fully practice it now, that there needs to be an articulated goal for a community that's like, we have the capacity to hold room for all of this. And I would love to see more proactive space where it's not just like, oh, we're reacting because some harmful thing happened and now we have to formulate these structures. It's like, what would it look like to have groups where people are like, we're survivors of harm, and we are processing how that has shaped us and what that creates. That's a lot of what I've seen in spaces that are somatically organized, or it's a somatic training or something like that, is people saying, you know, I was hurt in a very, in a very tender or vulnerable time when I was very young, and it's caused me to do things I'm ashamed of. And that shame causes me to act out. And I mean, when people are able to say that, it just unlocks something that then doesn't have to strike out or act out, right? Because it's like, I can look at you and I can see the thing that you think is the most shameful about you. And I can say, you didn't deserve the harm that started that shame. You never deserve that, right? And I can see your humanity even with the harm that you've done. We even have shame practices, where it's like, you say, even if I've done this horrible thing, I'm still deserving of love. I'm still deserving of community. It can get really profound, because for a lot of us, we are unlearning, like, I deserve hell. I deserve to like spend eternity burning in hell for making a mistake or saying a bad word, or all these weird ideas that are perpetuated throughout our human experimental existence. It's like, well, what if I don't? What if actually I'm not that bad? What if I'm just figuring this out like everyone else? And we've all done shameful things, or things we feel ashamed of. So some thoughts there.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think this next question sort of hinges onto that one. The questioner is an organizer with a group called Black, Queer, and Intersectional Collective. And one of the questions that they like to ask their members is, what does liberation look or feel or smell or sound or taste like to you? So could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So the first thing is, it feels like a relaxing of all the bands throughout my body that hold tension, right? So there's like a band around my eyes that's like, can be, and I have a little line that's here. I'm like, what is it? I'm going to figure it out from here. And it's like that relaxes. I can feel my jaw relax. I can feel my shoulders drop and fall back. It really feels like, oh, I don't have to be hyper vigilant in my body, because I'm free. And so I can just be in my body, taking deep breaths. It smells like, I don't know why, but this is just what comes up. But I always imagine, like, what did Harriet Tubman smell when she crossed the line? When it was like, okay, that was not freedom. We're on that side. And then, and I'm like, what did it smell? I'm like, it smells like a forest. It smells like you can smell the forest, because you're no longer running through it for freedom. Like, you can smell it, And for me, it also smells like cedar and juniper and sage, that's the combination of things that I used for my cleansing processes. When I'm like, something toxic has tied its way onto me, and I'm going to cleanse that from me because I cannot carry it. It tastes like good, clean water. Abundant, the way you drink water when you're like, I have so much of it, I don't have to worry about it. I can just drink my fill, and there's a bathroom nearby. It's going to be great. Yeah, those are some things that come up. Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
There's a feeling of togetherness. I really can feel there's like, we're in the great circle. There's even if I'm sitting and I feel alone, the way trees are like in the forest, and it's like they're standing alone, but they're in a community that is deeply connected underground. There's that feeling of like, oh, I'm never actually alone, in the good way.
Beautiful. I would like some of that water right now. It sounds perfect.
I was like,
yeah, there we go. Okay, well, this question I think is a really juicy and spiky one. The question is, how can we bring these ideas into our workplace? So the questioner says that in their organization, there are a handful of system changers who are really focused on the work, and then a group of sort of generally supportive people who don't take action, a sort of large silent block. How can we bring everyone into the conversation, even when they don't see it as applying really directly to themselves in an immediate way?
I love this question. Also, I keep getting a little notice that my internet is unstable. So if I'm a little in and out, I'm at my mom's house and we're all like trying to work on the internet. So,
Of course.
you know. So I think this is one of the reasons I say try to be proactive rather than reactive. Because a lot of times the loud system changes, it's like, this has to change right now. You know, it's something that's just happening. But if you create a culture, it's like, we have an ideal culture. Let's first name that together as a workplace, right? Right. So doing processes that allow people to write their visions on Post-it notes, write stuff anonymously, write visions that can be woven together. When I do visioning work with people, I'll often say, let's all put our visions up. And then is there anything up here that I actually don't want to see, that everyone doesn't want to see? Which is a crucial step, because sometimes, again, we'll just put it all up on the wall, but we can't actually do every single thing. And sometimes people are quiet because they actually don't agree. And they're like, I don't know how to articulate, there's not a safe space to state a different opinion. And I think story circles are a really powerful way to help people move through some of this stuff. Yes,
Oh my goodness, I think we may have lost Adrian mid very rich thought. I'm gonna ask Tiaré if they wouldn't mind talking a little bit about
all right,
working.
hold on.
Oh, Adrian may be back, but maybe not.
Do you see me?
We don't see you yet, but we can hear you.
Okay.
Great.
All right.
Keep going. Keep going. Thank you.
Yeah. So when did I drop off?
You were midway into the answer about the question about how you get folks who are not invested.
Right. So yeah, story circles is actually, I think, one of the beautiful practices to be in. Have people tell the story of how they learned about class. Have people tell a story about how they learned what race they are and what that means about the power they should have in the world. Have people tell stories about those things that then can lead to what is a new story that we want to co-create with each other. And then I also recommend having buddies for change processes, like having someone else that you're working with, because some people are just like, I don't care what you do, I'm not speaking up in the big group. It's just not my spirit. So having some way for people of all different kinds to articulate, and even what Tiaré is doing right now, you might have people who are silent, but they could be visual, making sure that everyone actually has a role to play. That's one of the quickest ways you can get more people engaged in a process. You know, in a healthy ecosystem, everyone is not an oak tree, right? Everyone is not a parrot. Everyone is not doing the same work. So figuring out and asking people, how would you like to contribute to this process? Do you agree with this process? Do you have another idea? And then accountability can work here too, right? It's just sort of like this, we're saying that these systems are racist. Where do you fall on that? You know, having that as an intimate one-on-one conversation. So it's not just, yeah, you know, racism is bad. You know, it's like, and where do you sit inside of that? You know, like, do you identify inside of that? Do you feel like you are upholding any of those standards? Is it internal? But getting people to really have to answer some questions themselves. Again, one-on-one is generally more successful than like in the middle of a meeting. Are you racist? You know, that's not how most people want to enter that conversation. And I think we try that so often is we're like, we start from the combat space instead of starting from the invitation, you know?
Thank you for that. We have a pair of questions that are thinking about spirituality. So one of them is asking how spirituality plays a role in your thinking, and another is asking you to talk about. They are also someone who works with astrology and tarot as tools for healing and liberation, and we'd love to hear you talk about how those connect you to emergent strategy or pleasure activism. So that I might put them together.
Yeah, smart, good choice. You know, I believe that I've been getting more brave about about speaking to the spiritual aspects of all of this as I have learned more. I was raised in relationship to like a very specific, Baptist Christian worldview. And so there was that kind of, a much more gentle, it wasn't like an overarching huge fire and brimstone thing, but there was some of that. But there's also a lot of beauty. I experienced a lot of beauty in the church experience. I loved singing with people. I loved the idea of Jesus. Jesus was badass. I was just like, so you're just like out here, just like whatever y'all talking about, I'm over here with like the prostitutes cleaning their feet. That resonated to me. I was just like, oh, you see all of the children as divine children that are worth dying for. That's huge. That really moved me. And I think moved my young organizing. And I've had to acknowledge that when a group of people gets together and is given permission to be themselves, spirit enters the room every single time. And when a group of people is asked, like, what would you do if you wanted to truly address this harm that has happened in your community? Ritual emerges immediately. And it's not because I'm creating that. We did a series of 10 Emergent Strategy immersions in 2019. And every single time, our structure was very simple. Get into groups based on these elements and, come up with an offering around a problem in your community. And we were moving heaven and earth and spirit and grief. And everything happened. And I think it's because that's what we want to do. We know how to do it, but we're so often held away from it. So I've had to humble myself to the fact that that's what is, and I better catch up. And so my own spiritual practices that I bring into that work, the tarot practice is massive for me. I now have, I think, 42 decks or something. I traveled with 3 of them for this trip, or 4. And I find it a helpful way for me to have a conversation with the universe. I get very into these practices that like somehow have existed through many, many cultures over tons of time and space. I'm really into that. And tarot has lineages that just go back in so many directions. And I like the idea of sitting and saying, universe, how do you want to use me today? What do I need to embody in this moment? And the thing I like about tarot is that it acknowledges that spirit is within us. There's an inner knowing that each of us has, an inner voice that each of us has. And for some people, you can think of it as a divine voice. For others, it's just like, this is the accumulation of all your knowledge, which is also spiritual. Like if I just think of the world as it is, to me, I get spiritually overwhelmed by it. I'm like, just DNA. Like I just like, it just is so outrageously miraculous to me that we exist on this planet and that there might be other life out there, that there's other things. They just found 3 new life forms on Mars. Like, what? All of that to me, I'm like, that's as divine as it needs to get for me. I don't need a mind behind it all. I'm just like, there's those things. And then astrology, I started playing with it, just very like, whatever, I read my horoscope. But now I'm like, I don't understand how this works, but this works. Like this stuff really is something, it starts to make sense, when you're like, oh, of course, all these different forces, these planetary bodies influence each other. That's science. Like they're moving, there's energies each of them has. There's solar energy that is being put out. There's wavical energy that's being put out. Like science says that each of us is having these impacts and the planets are also having these impacts. So I love like aligning science with astrology because people are like, whoa, that's not science. I'm like, no, but science does not deny that there are energies to all of these things that have impact in the universe and that we're in a dynamic living universe. And if anyone tried to tell me Mars is not having an impact, I'm like, then how else are you going to explain what I just did? So I love it. I don't use it. I try not to use it to get out of things, but it is an ancient spiritual practice and it is one that makes a lot of sense to me, especially as an elemental being. I'm a witch, which means that I work with elements. That's at the very simplest level. It means that I'm like, I build little altars everywhere I go, or I'm like, there's some rocks and there's some water and there's something made of fire that I can burn. There's something that will shift the air. I write my prayers down. I write down the things I want to manifest because I believe in the elemental combination. And I will say it all seems to work. My life is absolutely incredible and I manifested it this way. And, so, which I have a good friend who is Christian. She's been Christian for a long time. She's kind of in an unraveling of it right now, but she's like, your way seems to work much. She's like, you are experiencing what feels like heaven on earth to me. And I'm really curious about that. Right. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, who benefits from waiting till we die for heaven, which death is the mysterious. We don't know. I know for sure that I can find joy here and now. And I know for sure that Black people and brown people, indigenous people, all of us, women, like everyone who's been oppressed, particularly, but all humans, we deserve to feel that joy right now. I don't think that'll take away from heaven if it's waiting for us on the other side. I think if we show up and we're like, I cultivated joy. That's what I did the whole time. I wasn't sure about what was going to happen afterwards, but I cultivated joy the whole time. Let me in. I think it's all good either way. And maybe there'll be some dinosaurs there. So.
Okay, I hope so.
I hope so. I'm just like, there better be dinosaurs in heaven. Those poor creatures, they did not do anything.
I think we have time for one more, and I think I'm going to choose one that's about a speculative future. So this questioner is saying, if you could design a physical public space, and they're offering like a gallery or a museum, but you take it the way you want to take it, to support individual and collective healing and belonging, what might that look like? What would you include or exclude? Can you just dream us a future?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that the spaces where this has happened for me have had common elements. One is that there's been big open space with tons of light pouring into it. Sometimes it's been outdoors, like a circle of trees around some flat grassland. Sometimes it's been inside with like sort of the pillars of the walls, but there's open space and that people can sit and be in whatever way is the most comfortable for them. I think a lot of healing gets missed because people are literally physically uncomfortable and they're like, I can't rest into this moment. There would be good acoustics. So if the trees are kind of tucked over you in this way, it actually creates a really beautiful acoustic space. But if you're in a physical space, a good high ceiling and carpeted floors can create a really beautiful acoustic space. And the good acoustics both work at a level of accessibility, but they also work for singing together. And singing together, breathing together is a huge part of healing together, even screaming together. I've been in spaces where we're doing collective body work. So like half of the people give somatic body work, and then we shift over. And so literally you're laying on a table while people are unraveling and releasing. And it's just incredible how we can move each other beyond what any of us thought was possible. So it's a space where there's no embarrassment for sound. And the circle is really important, that everyone can be in one circle, no one at each other's backs. And then there's access to water. It's even better if there's the sound of water nearby. I've had some very beautiful meetings, like right on the beach or out on the ocean or on a lake, where you can just hear that lapping, those waves. And access to the sky, really being able to like see what's happening in the sky, going out at night, being able to see what's happening with the moon. Those are some things, some of the biggest healing I've ever done in my life was in an old barn that had many of these qualities. It had been renovated, but there was a bunch of cows outside that would come running up outside the sliding glass door. And so it's like, we're watching the sky, watching it, and these cows would come and they'd be like, looking at us and watching us heal. So that is to say, I think there's something about nature being not a stranger to it, like being in a place where like nature can see you, some non-human nature can see you and witness you and hold you. Oh, and that's also, if you're not outside, easy access to being able to go outside, take your shoes off and put your bare feet on the ground. Because once you move all that stuff, Earth is the only place it can go. It really is the only place it can hold all that we're walking with. So those are some things I would hope for all of us. And a pool and a hot tub. Anyway.
That's a gorgeous Thank you so much, Adrian. We could keep this going forever, but I know we're at time, and I want to just give Tiaré a moment if you want to pop on for any last thoughts that you have about the work that you're unfolding in front of us here before I wrap us up. Tiaré, do you have anything that you'd like to say to the space?
Yeah, there's so much story and richness to weave in together. I feel like I could make 6 images and it could be ongoing. And I also
Thank you
know
for this beautiful work.
Thank you. Thank you also for the names of people to read more about. I'm excited to check them out. This work, I feel like, what to say about it? I wanted to make these concentric circles and share some of those thoughts about like, how do we start change within ourselves that ripples out into these bigger systems? And I really appreciate the metaphors of mycelium, for example, you'd shared, like if you take one mushroom out, the system is still the same. And how do we weave in that connection with nature and the universe and abundance into how we approach this change work? And it lands so close to home with me as I was like hearing you when you said like, oh, I don't know if I can spend any more energy on this person with the harm that they're doing. And at the same time, we all benefit from healing those cycles of harm. And so I think that this conversation is like a drop in a bigger ocean, to end with that metaphor of waves. And I hope that there's seeds here that people can take and continue growing with.
Thank you for that, Tiara. What a wonderful sort of, let's call it a semicolon, because it's not a period on the end of this sentence. I think there's more to come. Folks, thank you for being here with us today. If you enjoyed this talk and want to watch it again or share it with a friend who wasn't able to attend, we'll have a recording available at ccad.edu/virtual-ccad after April 13th. Please follow Adrienne Marie Brown and her work on her website or Tiaré on theirs. And thank you really to all of you for being here with us, and have a wonderful rest of your day and a weekend. And we'll see you later. Thanks, everybody.